Recording in progress.
Okay, so it's 10 o'clock and we will be starting right now. I see some familiar names in the crowd. We've got DVS Sabah. This is not familiar to me, but I think to Dr. Adrian. CJ Tan. We've got Gary. Hi, Gary from the East Sarawak. And also Tony Sebastian. Datin, your friend, this one. Okay, right on the dot. Hi everyone, welcome to the 32nd edition of the Tuesday Talk Live by Place Borneo. This is the place for us to share ideas, information, solutions. And today we're going to discuss a few of the solutions that we have for the rabies outbreak in Sarawak. We've got some great speakers with us today. And Heidi Ho to all the viewers on our partner TV Sarawak's Facebook and also our YouTube channel, of course, those on Zoom. Hello everyone. Now, while everyone around the world is worried about COVID-19, Sarawak is also facing another virus outbreak concurrently, and this is the rabies outbreak. And during our rehearsal today, I thought it was Dr. Ho mentioned this, it was very accurately said. COVID-19 has a 0.1% mortality rate. But it's everywhere, everyone's talking about it. But rabies has a 99.9% mortality rate. And yet not many people are aware of this, especially in Sarawak where it is happening right now. I'm not saying COVID is not as important, but we should know what to do if we get rabies. So are you aware of what you should do if you get bitten? Now, if you don't know, please ask our speakers. Those of you on Zoom, you can put on the Q&A option at the bottom. And those on Facebook or YouTube, you can use the chat box and we'll pick it up from there. Now, let's start from the very beginning. How did this all begin? How did the rabies come into Sarawak? And I think for this, we'll call the vet in the house. We've got Dr. Adrian, and as the director of the Department of Veterinary Services Sarawak. So how did this rabies start in Sarawak, Dr. Adrian?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Mona, for inviting DVS Sarawak to share with public on this rabies. Before 2017, Sarawak was historically free. We are actually free before 2017 until one rabid dog bite a person in Kampung Paan Remo. Kampung Paan Remo is where I come from, actually, my area. So this rabies is very close to my heart. So this infected rabid dog is a free roaming dog, actually. Bite a person, and then after that the person infected with rabies. The person that died, because Sarawak at that time, there is no history of rabies, so nobody knows about rabies in Sarawak, because before that was free. So when the person actually died of rabies infection, and then the hospital alert TVS, so we took the sample. We sent the sample to Veterinary Institute, Ipoh, Perak, and then it was confirmed rabies. And on the 4th of July, the state of Sarawak declare Kampung Paan Remo area as rabies infected area under Section 37, Veterinary Public Health Ordinance 1999. Immediately after that, DVS Sarawak carry out mass vaccination. Within the 10-kilometer radius, we vaccinate all the animal in that area, dog and cat, even monkey, we vaccinate. So that is the first step that we carry out. We don't know really how this rabies come into Sarawak, but ways before 2017, there is a reported rabies outbreak in our neighboring country, the Kalimantan side. Yeah, a lot of victim that side also. So we suspect the rabies come from the other side. That's from DVS. Probably Dr. Ho can continue with how the rabies started in Sarawak.
Yeah. So Dr. Ho, since you are dealing with humans instead of animals, so maybe you and you're with the communicable disease control and surveillance with the Sarawak State Health. So maybe you can tell us how's the first few cases of human infection for rabies.
All right. Thanks, Mona. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Dr. Adrian. So I agree. Just want to echo again with what Dr. Adrian has mentioned just now. Sarawak has been historically rabies-free, free from rabies until 2017. So actually, for all the clinicians who are actually serving in Sarawak, I mean, the diagnosis of rabies has never come across our mind because we have never even heard about rabies in Sarawak. So the very first 3 cases in Sarawak, reported in Sarawak, was actually 3 children aged 4 to 7 years old from Syria at that time, who were actually admitted to the Sarawak General Hospital in Kuching with viral encephalitis at that time, means some infection involving the brain. So however, despite having 3 weeks, more than 3 weeks roughly, in the after the admission, we were not able to find the actual diagnosis or the cause for the infection. So these 3 children, however, have some similarity other than coming from Syrians, actually from 2 families at that time. So they actually presented with some atypical clinical presentations for this encephalitis, means any infection of the brain. So these 3 children have shown some very aggressive symptoms. Some, they were actually at times very agitated, aggressive. Some of them actually have hallucinations. So, and there were actually some features showing some fearfulness towards water, refused to drinks and so on. So eventually, all of them basically clinically progressed and worsened, and eventually all of them required assisted mechanical ventilation at the end. So the diagnosis for rabies only come to mind when the father of one of the child informed the clinicians during a talk saying that the child was bitten by a dog about 1 to 2 months before she fell sick. So he was mentioning that a lot of the dogs at that village were actually suddenly turned very aggressive, starting to bite humans, and a lot of them actually were quite ill and just disappear, some of them. So this immediately triggered the possibility of rabies at that time. So we have alerted the Sarawak Health Department for further investigation. So I was the epidemiology officer in Kuching at that time and being the trainee of the epidemic intelligence program. So I was actually called upon to investigate further in the ground at the field, and we actually managed to interview some of the villages at that affected kampongs, interview with the staff in the clinics and also hospital, and we were actually quite surprised to know, to gather some of the significant history. For example, I think starting from end of March to and also starting from April, there were significant dogs actually found to be turning aggressive, suddenly biting people, and a lot of them were clinically very ill, some of the dogs, and some just died or just disappeared. So this immediately triggered us the high possibility or high risk of rabies in those areas. So we actually taken the clinical samples for all these 3 children, hand carried it over to the Institute of Medical Research, IMR, in Kuala Lumpur. I remember it was on the 30th of June, and the result was out on the same day. So then the diagnosis was made immediately, and the Ministry of Health has actually come out with an immediate statement on the early morning of the 1st of July, declaring the first 3 cases of human rabies in Sarawak, and that's how we actually triggered off all our interventions and control measures together with the Department of Veterinary Services. So since then, we have actually, like what Dr. Adrian has mentioned, we have carried out very rapid active case detection, aiming to look for everyone, especially in Syrian actually, who has actually been bitten by any dogs in that area, because we need to give the vaccination as fast as possible, knowing that we are probably at the end of the incubation periods if the outbreak has actually lasted for more than three months. So at that time, every single day actually counts. So trying to look for everyone to be given the vaccination. So by the end of 2017, we have another 3 more cases from Syrian. So a total of 6 cases, 6 human cases in Syrian itself detected positive for human rabies. by the end of 2017. So subsequently, I think the subsequent year in 2018, we have another 10 cases of human rabies. And this time it actually spread. We also have cases in Kuching, Simunjan, and even Sri Aman area. So the following years, another 6 cases, but we have a case from Muka itself in 2019. So last year, we have another 9 cases, and a lot of them, 7 out of the 9 were actually detected positive at the second half of the year. So this time, Cebu, Selangor also detected positive. And this year is served, until now, we have 4 officially declared human rabies cases, another few more pending for declaration by the Ministry of Health. So officially, we have 35 human rabies cases that has been officially announced by the Ministry of Health, and only 2 survivors involving 2 children at the moment. So the rest ended up with 33 deaths actually out of the 35 cases.
Wow. Okay. And Datin, Dona, as the president of SSPCA, you guys deal with a lot of dogs in your shelter. So what do you guys do when it was announced then?
Well, when it was we first received the message, it was my heart just dropped. It was like the worst nightmare. We'd had, I think in 2015, we had Asia for Animals conference where we had 5 papers on rabies, and 2016 we did one just in Sarawak on rabies preparedness, because I had attended a conference in Australia, in Darwin, where they were worried about bats flying over from Papua New Guinea and infecting the dogs. So this was something that sort of like inspired me to think about, what happens in Sarawak because of our open borders. So when we first heard about the announcement from Medical in 2017, so my first reaction was to tell all of our people who were on our WhatsApp group with even Save Our Strays, SOS and SSPCA. I said, okay, nobody say anything. Nobody say anything until I can verify the news. So at least you don't get sort of like misleading messages going out. And then when we got the news, confirmed the news, so the first thing I did was to contact the vet department and also our DCM, Dr. Amar Douglas, and to tell him, please, let's look at vaccination, because vaccination is the only way you can really eradicate the disease. I think people understand it better now with COVID and all that. When you hit the higher numbers of vaccination, you tend to stop or lessen the disease. So we went down to ground zero with the vet department. On their first few visits, we went and met the villagers, spoke to the villagers, to see what happened. And then so we listened to their stories, as Dr. Adrian and Dr. Ho were saying, about how the dogs' characters started to change. And so we were there right from the very beginning, and then helping them, because the vet department at that time only had a few vets to deal with the whole of Sarawak, dealing with livestock, chickens, cows, goats, everything, the pig farms and all that. So they weren't very used. They weren't very used to handling domestic dogs and cats. So we were there to help them with the handling of the animals and to show them and to talk to the villagers on how best to handle the animals. And so that's when we started the vaccination. I remember we were in Syrian doing vaccination with vet department, assisting them in handling the animals. And then since then, our main push when we do education is talking about rabies prevention, and prevention of dog bites also,
And you guys also stopped taking animals at the shelter.
Yes, that's right, because at that time in 2017, there was no readily available vaccination against rabies in Sarawak. So we had to protect the animals that we have, because we have about 400 animals within our care at our shelter at that time. And also to protect the staff, because we don't know the health of animals being brought in. So we had to stop the handover from public. But now all our animals have been vaccinated annually. Vet department comes in and helps us with that as well.
So before the vaccination started, we did not have that. So how did we manage it, Dr. Adrian?
Before the vaccination started? DVS has a very strict importation procedure for pet from outside Sarawak. We used to enforce 6-month quarantine from importation of dog from rabies infected country, and then one depend on the blood rabies titer, it can reduce to 1 month at that time. But even though our quarantine is very strict, we have a very long and porous border, about 1,000 kilometer from Samatan up to Lawas. So with opening of oil pump in the state, the border getting nearer and nearer, and then that's how the dog was brought in, probably from Indonesia, by the workers probably. So there is no vaccination at that time. Most of Sarawakian that never heard about rabies. So it's a very challenging for the department actually to do vaccination, full vaccination at that time, because rabies actually already present in the state. Only it incubating, once the dog is bitten, the rabies can stay with the dog for up to 6 months. And it only saw the symptom once it reached the brain, its brain. So in a kind of a bit chaotic at that time, because whether we should do a roadblock to prevent the movement of animal. Of course, we do roadblock and issue ban movement of animal, but dog, they don't require passport to move. So they can move freely. It's very difficult to control the animal movement itself. That it's how it spread to, because most of the dog in Sarawak was not vaccinated. Not vaccinated. The free roaming dog are not vaccinated. So it can spread very easily among the dog population.
So before, a bit later on, we'll talk about the vaccination program. But before that, maybe you guys also had targeted removal of dogs, correct? So maybe you want to talk a bit about that and whether that was effective or not.
Targeted removal of dog is one of the method carried out in the infected area. Once the area declared as rabies infected, we have a 10-kilometer radius. Then we carry out mass vaccination, door-to-door vaccination. But the stray that exposed to rabies, because animal, once they're exposed to rabies, there is no cure. I mean, the animal will eventually come up with rabies, and it might bite human. So those dogs removed from the street, humanly removed, using the approved method. And I think it reduced the number of infection. And then most of the targeted removed animal at that time, when we conduct the lab test, when we do the lab test, it's about once the symptom appear, it's about 50% positive. 50% positive. Quite high number of suspected rabies, especially the bite case. About in 2017, for example, we collected 300 sample, about 40% positive. And then in 2018, the numbers also about 625 sample collected, about 31% positive. It getting reduced because of our vaccination program and target removal. For 2021, dropped to 19%. Out of 466 sample we collected, 19% positive for rabies, dog rabies lah. From this 466 animal, actually almost half from the passive surveillance. Passive mean when public report bite case or sometimes public report their animal have this symptom. So we collect the animal and we conduct tests. We do the lab test lah. And then about from that number, 50% of the surveillance on the passive surveillance, about 40% positive.
Oh, okay.
The current for 2021. Meaning from this rabies lab test, we can tell the public that if any dog out there not vaccinated, chances for the dog to be positive rabies is still there. Because beside 50% from the total number that we collected, 50%, half on active surveillance. Active mean we target animal which is no owner, stray dog, and 10% of this dog are positive. 10% of any dog that not vaccinated. So with this result, we can say that Sarawak, we need to vaccinate. I mean, the owner need to vaccinate the animal to prevent this rabies from further spreading.
And with targeted removal, I know they've had some, controversial cases, I guess, because people don't understand the reason why we're doing it.
Yeah, people don't understand.
Yeah. So, and Datin, you mentioned about one case at the Reservoir Park, I think a few years back. Maybe you want to talk about that one.
Yeah, so one of the more difficult parts about this whole rabies outbreak has been the human and so animal conflict, or human and human conflict, not understanding why some people are doing certain things. There was a case, the Reservoir Park dogs, there was a pack of about 6 dogs. And I remember there was one black dog that bit 2 or 3 people in the Reservoir Park. And then after that, he ran over to amphitheater and jumped on a child, a 7-year-old child, and bit him on the shoulder. So the authorities had to remove the pack that they could catch from the Reservoir Park. And so there was also quite a big public outcry about this. But we have to explain to them, like even in America, in the US, where vaccination is compulsory, if there is any animal, because they have microchipping and all your records are in your microchip. If there's any animal that is caught with an unknown vaccination status, they must put the animal to sleep. This is in America, where there is no canine rabies. There's no rabies in the dogs in the US, but they do have rabies in the wildlife. So in order to prevent any crossover to humans, therefore they practice very strict measures. So this was one of the great difficulties that animal welfare groups had in dealing with the rabies outbreak, was trying to deal with those people who were upset. There was 2 very strong emotions were going on at that time, and even up to today, because of misunderstandings. Also, we had to explain to the council why you have to handle an animal with respect, humanely. Even though that animal might be having to be put to sleep or something, but you cannot just drag him through the streets and put him onto your truck. So this also causes public outcry. So it's dealing with the public reactions, having to deal with the disease itself, and then finding the balance in between where you hope people can understand the measures that need to be taken. So as a responsible pet owner, we cannot stress enough that you must vaccinate your animals. And to keep them safe, keep them within your own compound or on a leash when they're out in public areas, so that they don't become a nuisance to your neighbors or to anybody. Like we say, when you go jogging here, people here jog with a stick in hand because they're worried about strays that might come after them. I had a friend who was visiting, and he's an Englishman, and Englishmen, love their animals, and he has dogs at home. But when he was jogging just outside my house, he came back and he says, I cannot jog. He says, I feel very threatened by the dogs that are running around. So this is something that we need to educate the public about: being responsible, keeping your animals safe within your own compound. Don't let them run outside, because they might come in contact. Like I said, vaccination against COVID, you might come in as a casual contact, and then you don't know when your animals will become infected.
Yeah. And I think one of you guys mentioned that 70% of the infection in humans are from their own pets and not from strays. So actually, it's on the onus of the pet owners themselves that should vaccinate their pets. But is there a resistance to this? Are there anti-vaxxers out there among pet owners themselves? In your experience, maybe Datin or Dr. Adrian?
Yeah, 70% of the dog positive rabies with owners, because those are not vaccinated dog. Yeah. The dog also breed 3 times a year, so it's difficult to get all the dog vaccinated if the owner they careless. Takut tidak apa attitude, they're not really keep the dog in their compound, and then they are not vaccinating the dog, so that the whole problem. When owner cannot handle dog, sometimes they own a dog, but they're scared to handle the dog. They don't want to bring the dog to the clinic or to the veterinary office, because we are giving free vaccination to dog owners throughout the state. We have all our offices throughout the state. So that is the challenge that we're having, because most of the own dog are free roaming, either not under effective control. There are 3 types of stray actually. Strays with owner, the free roaming dog with no owner, that one different story lah. And the abandoned dog also is one of the issue. When the owner have so many dogs that they are not responsible, they abandon the dog. So this give opportunity for the dog to getting virus, rabies virus lah, bitten by other dog. Yeah, Datin Dona can explain further on that.
Yeah. Well, we did a house-to-house vaccination program in Batu Kawah for 3 months, which we worked with SOS and vet department. And we actually covered every single house and every farm in Batu Kawah. And there's where you see, and it's a good mix because you get the kampong scenario, you get the urban scenario. And that's where you see it's actually the people, there's a question there, how do you control your kampong dogs? So in the kampong situation, like what we experienced in Syria, and also everybody knows whose dog that is. And so I think Dr. Adrian will be able to confer this one, that in the kampong, they have gone to the kampongs and they know all the dogs there have been vaccinated, because people will identify. They will tell you, oh, this neighbor has 2 dogs. I know, they know who has which dog.
Yes,
but when you go into an urban situation, like we experienced in Batu Kawah, you knocking on their door, explain to them that you're giving them vaccination. Some will tell you, I don't have any dogs. And then when you say the vaccination is free, oh yes, I have 2 dogs in the back. They don't want to spend the money to look after their dog's health. Then when you tell them, but it's free, then they say, oh yeah, I do have 2 dogs. And then the other, you ask them, why is your dog not vaccinated? Oh, my dog doesn't like to go into my car. But whereas when you go to the kampong, I remember in Syrian, there was one case where this guy on a motorbike, he had 3 dogs at home. So he came 3 times, each time carrying 1 dog in his motorbike. So sometimes you see the relationship in an urban situation. A lot of people don't see the dog as their family, but whereas in the longhouse, in the kampong, more of them see the dogs more as their family that needs to be taken care of. And of course, when you're giving them free vaccination, that is something that they can afford, but they're responsible in taking their animals to the vaccination center. Whereas in the urban situation, they actually come and they say, well, can you come to my house? They're a bit more laid back in their attitude towards vaccination. And then some of them will tell you, oh, my dog never goes out. But we have videos in our shelter where dogs can actually climb over your chain link fence and jump out. So we have cases in our shelter where we know certain dogs are really good escape artists. So that's why you must make sure that all your dogs are vaccinated. And if you can afford it, then cats as well.
So in the kampongs, if you can't keep the dogs within the compounds, and usually in kampong it's all open anyways,
It's
for
a
one
free
whole big
roaming,
compound, so then the best thing to do is actually to vaccinate the dogs in the kampong,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the best option. Okay, and talking about challenges with vaccination, apart from the owners themselves, what other challenges are we facing in Sarawak with vaccinating dogs? Perhaps Dr. Adrian, this one would be.
Dog breed 3 times a year.
Mm.
They have litters and maximum average of 6. So that gives us challenge to have at least 70% coverage. We have estimated about 250,000 own dog in Sarawak, excluding the stray. And our vaccination, as I said just now, vaccination coverage, we have a lot of challenge because of the wide area that we need to cover. Even though we have make it compulsory under Section 40, Veterinary Public Health Ordinance, that we make it mandatory for all dogs in Sarawak to be vaccinated against rabies, failing which they can be fined up to 1,000 ringgit. And also under Section 37, for letting dog free roaming also can be fined under Section 37, amounting to maximum 2,500 ringgit. But this need a lot of awareness to the public and especially dog owner. One of the challenge is the dog itself, because it's breeding very fast. And then not most of the dog are not neutered, so they can spread, they can breed. And our biggest challenge also because of the long and porous border from Kalimantan. That's why we established one team, the step already established one, what we call it, immune belt enforcement team, to ensure that the dog in the near the border are all vaccinated and protected against rabies. So that is one thing. Secondly, the awareness campaign to the rural people, it may, because most of our campaign through social media, and then the rural people maybe don't get information. And then another attitude of people, even though we tell them about the importance of vaccination, but they don't get the message. Probably they thought this rabies is not, it wouldn't affect them anyway. But yeah, that is the difficult part, because if everybody understand the disease, understand the virus, the fact about rabies, they will be immediately get medical treatment after being bitten, because dying from rabies is very painful. And then if you see YouTube how people died of rabies, it's really sangat sakit dan horrible. So if the person knows about the effect of this rabies or the disease, but I think they will automatically go to hospital to get proper treatment. And at least their dog, if they love their dog, they have to vaccinate it against rabies. And then this, if everybody do this, we can eradicate rabies from Sarawak. That's why we put 2025 as a target to have no rabies in dog. Because if we can control rabies in dog, human rabies can be prevented.
So you mentioned about the dog owners being fined if they are found to go against any of the instructions, right? So there's one question: how many dog owners have been fined over the past year?
I can't remember the figure, but we do more than more than 5 already
Okay.
fined, and then I think one is pending. They don't want to pay the fine. The rest they appeal for the fine, and then they pay. Yeah.
And there's one question here. If there's a lot of vaccines available, will I be assured of getting my dogs vaccinated if taken to the designated centers? So they just need to go to the center and they'll be assured to get the vaccines, right?
Yes, just go to my office. You can call our office and get appointment, so that our vet staff will attend to them immediately if they have appointment. Yeah.
So the control of rabies is not just the one size fits all. It's not just doing one thing, or not just vaccination. It's also neutering of all these stray animals and pets. And I know a lot of pet owners don't believe in neutering because they think it's unnatural. It's going against the gods. Given whatever to the animals. But also the pet owners themselves, responsible pet ownership, I would say, and some of them who let their pets out, just like that. So there's a lot of different angles to this problem here, and the solutions is, it comes in different ways. It's not just vaccination. And you mentioned about, the horrible, it's a horrible disease to actually have. And I think we would want to go into that because I think the misunderstanding of how the virus can affect the human being, I think that's the part where people don't understand how it can affect you. It's the same as COVID in the early days. I think a lot of people did not know how serious the situation was. And that's why you have anti-vaxxers and people who don't care about SOPs. I think it's the same thing here. So Dr. Ho, sorry, we've left you out in the discussion because we're talking about animals. So now we're going back to human beings. So maybe you can share with us some of the symptoms. If once you get bitten, what would you expect to notice in your body?
So rabies is a disease with a very wide range of incubation periods. Means by the time you're actually exposed and infected until you develop the disease or showing symptoms. So it's a wide range of durations, but typically it's between 1 to 3 months. 1 to 3 months after the bite incident. If they have rabies, they will start to show symptoms. But the incubation period can ranges from even few hours and even up to few years. But it's typically about 1 to 3 months. So most of those people, when they actually develop the rabies, actually, they were started with showing some very mild symptoms that actually just very general. We said this is a prodromal symptoms. Most of them would have some fever, and some would have just feel very weak, malaise, some just having nauseous, loss of appetite, and so on, something very general. But it can indicate the start of the disease actually. So eventually, gradually, some of the cases actually most of them will actually have some unusual sensation, especially over the bite wound. So even after a few months, when the bite wound is actually healed, they will start to show some unusual sensations, even like tingling, prickling. We said it's some paraesthesia, just abnormal sensation over the wound. So this is something very significant because if it is rabies, eventually they will progress to more severe symptoms in the next few days. So these are two main forms of clinical manifestation. So one totally opposite. One is called a furious type, a furious form of rabies, while the other one is a paralytic or dumb or paralytic form of rabies. So totally opposite. But the commoner one that we actually noted is actually the furious type. So most of the patients will start to show some agitation, aggressiveness. But usually we just start off by the families and the friends noted them to have some change in behaviors. So some will just suddenly feel very aggressive, restless, and typically they will start off with intermittent symptoms. So meaning that they might have alternate symptoms of being very aggressive, even hallucinating, but the next moment they were actually totally fine. So these intermittent changes, with, especially the aggressive or hyperactive parts of the behavior, will become more and more frequent and longer in duration over time until it basically predominates the person's behavior in the next few days where the disease progresses. So typically, we also heard that a lot of patients have hydrophobia. This is something very typical, hydrophobia, aerophobia. When these symptoms occur, we could actually be quite sure of the diagnosis eventually just by looking at the clinical manifestation. So this hydrophobia basically means they're actually very fearful even towards water. So typical symptoms that the family will note is that the person refused to take a bath, they refuse to drink, even for days. So they just even the view or the sight of the water can be very fearful to them. So this is something very typical. Aerophobia basically is some phobia of fearfulness even to the air. Aero is actually air. So even fear in breathing actually. So that's why eventually this when they eventually develops all these symptoms, they're actually a very advanced stage, and a lot of them will just progress into coma, and without any supportive management, most of them will actually just succumb to the disease in just less than 2 to 3 weeks time. So the other form is a paralytic form, whereby the person will develop weakness. So typically also they will start to have this weakness at the site of their wound. So for example, if they were actually bitten on the left toe, so they will start to have the weakness from the left lower limbs. So progressively it will actually progress upwards to the body and also to the other side of the body. So this is quite typical of the weakness, how it actually progresses. So sometimes just unknown weakness just suddenly develops. Even we have a 20 plus years old, early 20-year-old patients affected with rabies, just very well active, and the next moment he just fell and started to develop all these weaknesses. So eventually when the disease progresses, the weakness actually worsen, they will go into coma, and death will actually be actually inevitable actually. So a lot of time it is said that the furious type is actually more common, but probably because the paralytic type can frequently be misdiagnosed or underreported, because it can mimic a lot of other neurological diseases. So these are the two forms that we typically seen in our patients itself in Sarawak as well. But what we wanted to emphasize is that once the symptoms occur in any of our rabies patients, it is almost too late for us to stop the disease from progressing. It means even with the start of fever and so on, when it is a rabies disease, and eventually the disease will progress, and there's no treatment. If they actually have developed rabies, we can only provide supportive management, and there's no way we can stop the disease, and most of them will eventually die after 2 to 3 weeks. So there is no clinical diagnostic test to test for this rabies as well before they develop any symptoms. Because some people did come forward to us saying that they were bitten by a dog and they wanted to know whether they have infected with rabies or not. So unfortunately, there is no test that will be able to test for rabies until they started to present with the symptoms. However, as mentioned, once they started to have symptoms, it is in confirmed rabies, it is almost too late for us to prevent the death. So therefore, most of the people who actually infected or diagnosed with rabies eventually is a fatal disease actually. That's why it is one of the highest fatality rate among all the diseases in the world. So we can say even 99 or even more than 99% fatality rate for rabies itself actually.
But if they detect it early, as in they got bitten, how do you actually manage that so that you can actually recover?
So if the person has been bitten before the disease actually reaches the brain actually, when they start to show all these symptoms, we are able to prevent the development of rabies through vaccinations and also immunoglobulin and so on, which is what we call as a post-exposure prophylaxis. So although have I mentioned that rabies is fatal, it eventually is one of the highest fatality rates disease in the world, but still with very simple measures, we can effectively prevent this disease from being developed in person actually. So usually what we advise all the public is that if they were bitten by any dogs or cats, they have to do simple measures. One of them is to immediately and thoroughly flush and wash the wound under running tap water for at least 15 minutes and preferably with using salt. So just immediately just wash off, because this will help to remove the saliva that actually contains the pathogenic or the virus actually, just to quickly wash it off before it actually penetrates further into the wound. So quickly just wash it off, then seek treatment immediately at the nearest clinic or hospital. So unless it is profusely bleeding, just cover the wound and immediately go to the clinic. Never suture or bandage it tightly before you go to the clinic. Okay, so because we need to treat the wound first. So just unless it is profusely bleeding and is life saving. So otherwise, just clean it, go to the nearest hospital or the clinics, get assessed and get the treatment immediately. So once you're in the clinic or the hospital, the healthcare providers, especially all throughout Sarawak, has been trained to do, we call it as a dog bite assessment. So basically, we will look into the risk, whether the chances or the risk of getting rabies is high or not. So if it's high, we will either give vaccination or immunoglobulin. So once there's a bite mark that's been seen, it is at least a category 2 or 3 wound. So category 3 wound is different from category 2, just if it actually draws blood, you can see blood coming out, or if you actually press it, you can see blood oozing. So that's category 3. Otherwise, when you see a wound, it's at least a category 2. So category 2 wounds, we will give a post-exposure prophylaxis or post-exposure vaccination. So a complete course of a post-exposure vaccination will typically be at least 3 to 4 doses. At least 3 to 4 doses, depending on the type of regime that we are given. And also if they are immunocompromised, we might give an additional dose. So these 3 to 4 doses were usually given over the 1 to 2 weeks period. So it also, let's say if you're using an intradermal vaccination, sometimes we actually give it in both sides of your arms, or even for 1 dose. So if you only receive 1 dose of vaccination or injection during your first visit for the wound after the bite, and you were told that you do not need to come back for any further vaccination, most likely that you were not given any anti-rabies vaccination, because a complete dose or complete course of vaccination for anti-rabies will be at least 2 if you have been previously immunized, or even up to 4 or 5 doses. So it cannot be a 1 single dose. So likely that if you're only given 1 dose and told there is no subsequent doses, likely that you have actually either received an anti-tetanus injection or even just a painkiller. So this is something that a lot of people misunderstood, and they were thought that they were actually given the vaccination when they actually went to the clinic. So for those who are actually, usually we will give a full course of the vaccination unless the risk has been reassessed and deemed to be low. For example, if the dog sample has been found to be negative, we might discontinue the subsequent doses, but otherwise we will always give a full dose or full course of the vaccination. So for those with category 3 wound, means the wound is actually fresh and in category 3 and large. So we will give another treatment called rabies immunoglobulin. So this rabies immunoglobulin will be injected at the wound, or at least near the wound site. It is not at the arm, it will be at the wound or near the wound site. So this immunoglobulin will be given mainly to help to neutralize any viruses at the wound site as much as possible before it penetrates further into the nervous system. Because we know that any vaccinations, it will take at least probably a few days or few weeks for the body to actually respond to it and develop antibodies towards the pathogen. So, however, to immediately stop or reduce the invasion of the virus to the nervous system, we can give rabies immunoglobulin in addition to the vaccination that we give for category 2 and 3 wounds. So even though it just sounds very simple, just by washing the wound and just giving vaccination, it is very, very effective and has prevented most of the progression to develop into rabies actually. So this have to be done very fast, preferably within the first week from the bite incident, because as you mentioned, once the virus has actually reaches the brain, started to show symptoms, any vaccination or even immunoglobulin will be too late and it will be useless actually for us to stop the disease from progressing. So this is how it is actually important to quickly wash the wound and get assessed and vaccinated immediately after the vaccination, after the bites actually.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Ho. Sorry about me shouting just now. My dad was calling me, so I thought it was an emergency or something. Yeah, so we have this one question. Yeah, Dr. Adrian.
That one is symptom in human. For animal, I think the audience also want to know what is the symptom for animal. Yeah, first, your pet will, the first symptom, it will be behavior change. Not eating, that is abnormal behavior. It may off-feed, and then once the disease progress, it start hypersalivation or drooling. And then a few days later, it will be paralyzed. And you can see some animal are very aggressive, start biting. And then the animal normally died within 10 days. So this is one of the symptoms in unvaccinated animal, either cats or dog. So you can see actually your loving cat or your loving dog will start change in behavior.
So you would know this if they're your pets.
But
if macam stress, susah sikit lah because
stress very difficult because the stress, if they bite people, normally dog wouldn't bite if not provoked. The unprovoked cat or dog will bite if they're infected with rabies.
Okay. So and I think this is the next question is quite interesting. Rabies is commonly talked about and known in dogs, but how about cats? And there are a lot of stray cats as well, or even some cat owners who let their cats roam freely in and out of their house and compound. So are they also potential carriers and spreaders, and what can we do about that?
Okay.
Yeah, that was very interesting. Thank you, Dr. Adrian. It was very interesting when we met the FAO, food and this UN departments, FAO and also CDC from USA came to Sarawak. And so they noticed that there was a high incidence of rabies in cats, which is usually cats will get maybe 2% will get rabies. But in Sarawak at that time, I think we were closer to 5%. And they asked, why do we think this is so? Because it's actually double the normal average. And so I was saying, here in Sarawak, especially in the kampong scenario, cats and dogs actually tend to live together. It's very common for us here to see the cats and dogs playing together, sleeping together. So that is why there's a lot of cross-infection. And then another misconception, which is something that SSPCA had pushed in the beginning, is to not use the term anjing gila. It's not mad dog disease, because people will only then associate it with dogs, whereas you need to realize that you have to be vigilant in keeping watch on any mammal. So not chickens, because chickens are born from eggs. But any mammal, it can be cows, it can be monkeys, bats, any wildlife, musang. So in the US, the main carrier is the raccoon. So here we need to be watchful, and I do believe the wildlife department is actually, they do random testing as well on animals to make sure there's no rabies in the wildlife. So any cats, dogs, monkeys. A lot of people keep monkeys as pets. So that's why in the beginning, I know Dr. Adrian, they had actually vaccinated quite a few monkeys if they found people were bringing monkeys in especially in the kampong scenario for them to vaccinate. They did vaccinate them. But why the main focus is on dogs is because of the size of the bite. The dog bite compared to cat bite, dog bite is much bigger and it can be more damaging to the skin because of all their teeth and all that. And so it's the delivery through the saliva. The virus is in the saliva. And that is why if you have an open wound, you should not allow any animals to be licking your open wound as well. There was a case where a man developed rabies simply by getting splattered by the saliva of a rabid dog on his open wound. And because he said he hadn't been bitten, but he did have an open wound. And unfortunately, he succumbed to rabies after that. So this is why the main focus is on dogs. But it is advisable if you can afford to, you can go to any private clinic. We'll have the vaccination. So if you don't want to go to the vet department, because I think vet department concentrates mostly on vaccinating dogs.
Yes.
But if you have other animals that you wish to get vaccinated, then you can go to private clinics.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I brought my cats to one of the they set up a center somewhere, but it was declined. They said, no, we're not doing cats, we're only doing dogs. I'm like, oh, my cats are so heavy.
So you can go to private clinic.
Okay.
According to IE, Ms. Mona, vaccinating dog is the most cost-effective strategy for preventing rabies. That is the international on rabies.
And that's the reason why we are focusing on dogs first.
Yeah, so that's the biggest focus on vaccinating all dogs in the state.
And Dr. Adrian, I think you were answering one of Michael Lim's question about making vaccination legally compulsory. I think that was already mentioned. It is compulsory.
I already mentioned it's under Section 40. Under Section 40, Veterinary Public Health Ordinance is compulsory. Then if unvaccinated dog, if the dog is not free roaming or not exposed to any rabies, we can vaccinate it. We can actually vaccinate. That's why from the data that we collected from 2017 to now, almost 50% of the vaccination figure that presented to us first dose. Meaning they are never vaccinated, but they bring the animal, so we give them vaccination during the mass vaccination. So although it's an offense not to vaccinate, but please bring your animal to the vet office. We will give a vaccine straight away. But once your animal biting people, if there is a police case, then there is a case against the owner for not vaccinating their animal. There is a police case.
Oh, I see. Okay, so then it becomes something that you can be fined for not doing that
because
in advance.
Not vaccinating and let the animal free roaming and bite people.
So if, say for example, the public, they see some stray dogs, can they report to the council to catch these dogs and get them vaccinated, or what can we do when we see those strays?
Normally, strays, the council will deal with it. They will catch the dog and then put in the dog pound. Because the strays, we don't know the status. Probably it already incubating the virus, because virus can be in the body for up to 6 months without showing any symptom. Then normally, if there are a person who collected that the dog may belong to them, we can vaccinate the dog and give to them. But if no owner, then we have to put it to sleep humanly.
Oh, okay.
That will reduce the dog population in the state, and also to reduce the number of bite cases if there is an chances of dog getting rabies in the public, especially. It can cause danger to the public.
And when we're talking about pet owners, one of the question here talking about how if you search for pets on mudah.com, you will find sellers who sell their pets on Mudah and then stating that they will deliver their pets directly to you if you want to buy. So how do we control that, especially if it's across the border? Or and the question is also
from overseas, yeah.
Overseas,
From overseas.
I think this is more on across the borders. Yeah,
I think most of the airline they wouldn't allow any pet animal in their flight, except if there is a documentation showing that there is a proper vaccination certificate, import and export permit, health cert. Then we allowed this animal to be transported in the airline. We have informed all our forward agent and all that to be careful if dealing with this animal, because especially if no history of rabies vaccination. Also to public, if you happen to see any stray dog outside, be careful. If you want to bring it back home, make sure you observe it, quarantine it, and bring it to the clinic for vaccination. Then you can observe the animal for at least 14 days, whether the animal having rabies or not.
Okay.
And
it's like
remember to vaccinate it against rabies.
Yeah. Okay. There's another one also from Michael Lim. What about mandating the maximum number of dogs that a family can own? This one also, I think some families, they really just own so many dogs that they just lost track of where the dogs are or whether they're vaccinated. Is there any laws against the number of dogs that you can have at home?
It's under council. Under the local council.
But I don't think there's a law on that, right? Because I see.
I think the local council rule is that you should have maximum of 3 dogs per household. And if you want to have more than that, then you have to do a special application, and I think the licensing fees increase. There's another thing that we're trying to stop is breeders. Now I believe breeders have to pay, I think it's 1,000 ringgit license fee a year. Otherwise, you're not allowed to be a breeder, especially you're not supposed to be breeding animals in your house. So that's one, because one of the things we're talking about is animal population control, animal population management. So this is through the spay and neuter programs. Before COVID, we used to have regular spay and neuter campaigns, subsidized campaigns with MBKS and sometimes with DBKU. So this was to encourage pet owners to come up and get their animals vaccinated and also neutered, because the main problem we have with strays, and the main reason why SSPCA has about 400 animals under our care, is people throw away the unwanted babies. So like you were saying earlier, some people say it's cruel and unnatural to neuter or spay your pet. But then we ask them, which is more cruel, to neuter your pet or to throw away their babies 2 times or even 3 times a year, because they will give birth at least twice a year, if not 3 times. So it's cats and dogs. So it's the puppies and kittens that we see. That's why you see on Facebook, a lot of them are all young animals that are being abandoned. Sometimes, unfortunately, they'll come to our shelter at night and just throw them over the fence. And then the older dogs, because these are new animals coming in, so the older dogs will actually attack them, and usually we come and then the animals have been killed already. So this is why we advocate spay and neuter. And in fact, the government has approved a low-cost neutering clinic, but it's just that we haven't been able to find a proper venue yet while waiting for our animal village to be built, and then the low-cost clinic can be moved there under the watch of vet department. And also we need to partner with local veterinarians to come in and help us to do the neutering campaigns.
And there's one question here. Why does Sarawak have 30 days quarantine for imported animals, but Sabah or West Malaysia is only 14 days?
Recently, we reduced the number to only 2 weeks.
So now it's the same number of days.
Now we reduced already. Before this, we were very strict because no rabies. But we ourselves, we having rabies here. So we reduced the quarantine to 2 weeks. And we make it compulsory for rabies vaccination before we release the dog.
Okay.
If the dog is from the rabies free country, and they can come in without quarantine. For example, Australia, New Zealand. No quarantine.
Okay. And talking about puppies being thrown away, Michael is asking, should those who throw their puppies away be fined? I guess this is if you know who threw.
Yes.
If you can,
if you
got CCTV,
can,
you catch them and then you
how
can
to catch
find
the
them.
criminal,
Yeah, correct.
That's right. That's one of the problems is they do it in the middle of the night. Some of them will just sneak in, leave a box there, and then that's why most of them throw it away at markets or sidewalks and all these kind of things. So it's very hard to catch them. That's why you just need to educate the public.
Yeah, public.
Be responsible, vaccinate, and then spay and neuter your pet.
I think the main challenge here is education and awareness of the public. I'm going to take one last question because I don't want to go too much beyond 1 hour. And then this question is to Dr. Ho, actually, from Leo Tua. What should be advised to adamant bite patients who refuse to follow up on their IG shots and PEP vaccination, I'm guessing? Yeah.
Leo, our colleague.
The advice for those who actually defaulted. So I think it still falls back to educations and the counseling that we give to all the patients and all the bite victims actually when they seek treatment. So as mentioned, the whole full course of vaccination or the post-exposure prophylaxis for any bite incidents is it will take about 3 to 4 doses, especially for those who have not been immunized before. So you need to have a complete course of vaccination in order to be fully protected. So this we have actually been emphasizing a lot, especially when we are seeing the bite victims or the patients in our clinics or even in our hospital, and advising them to come back. But we do have some cases who actually defaulted. So however, we do have a system because in Sarawak, every bite incident is a mandatory notifiable disease actually to the nearest health office. So it means if any clinics or any healthcare professionals, whether it's in government or private, if they see a bite case, they have to notify to the nearest district health office immediately. So we will also notify to the vet department for them to take necessary actions, investigations on the animal. But at the same time, the district health office will investigate and they will follow up. So when they say if the person who is actually due for their subsequent dose on day 3, for example, and they defaulted, so we can inform our health officers to go to the house, to the ground, and to look for the person and advise them to come forward for the subsequent doses as well. So because it is very important for them to receive the complete course of vaccination in order for it to really work and be protective towards these people. So if they really receive a full course of the vaccinations follow up according to the full schedule, it can really be life-saving. So we can just to share with everyone here that as we know that rabies can kill most of the time, it actually develops into rabies. But however, if prompt intervention has been given to the person, it can still be life-saving. So this we can actually be seen because we have 2 survivors so far. Although we have 35 cases that has been officially announced, but 2 of them were actually, we have 2 survivors actually among the 2 children that were actually been infected and confirmed with rabies. So one of them was actually detected in Serian in 2017. Because at that time he was actually bitten before the outbreak started. So by the time we were able to give vaccination to the child, unfortunately he started to develop symptoms before the complete courses of the vaccination was given. I think it was only given after the 3rd dose, he started to show symptoms. So he actually was put under ICU, confirmed positive, put under ICU for months. He survived, but unfortunately with very severe neurological deficit. So the other survivor that we have was actually bitten end of last year in Bau actually. So this child was badly bitten. at the head and neck region. But fortunately, the mother quickly cleansed the wound and brought the child immediately to the nearest hospital. So in the hospital, we treated the wound and we actually immediately given the child the vaccination, full course of vaccination and immunoglobulin. It was a very fast, immediate action. And luckily, the mother was brought the child very fast to the clinic in the hospital actually, because the wound was really bad. So the child started to develop symptoms actually after about 10 to 11 days after the bite incident, and he was confirmed positive for rabies. But fortunately, after about 3 months plus in the hospital, he actually walks home with his parents, I think in the middle of February this year. So with all those prompt actions and they actually follow all the schedules, given all the immunoglobulin and so on immediately after the bite, it is still possible to be life-saving. So this is some of the message that we wanted to advise everyone. If you were bitten, please wash the wound immediately and come forward for assessment and treatment immediately. That is really, really important. But of course, the more important is don't get bitten. So no matter what,
No bite, no rabies.
Yeah, correct. So just protect yourself and your family. Just don't get yourself being bitten by any of the dogs or the cats, especially the strays. But however, if you're bitten, please immediately wash the wound and come forward to the clinic and hospital to get assessed, get your vaccination and immunoglobulin if indicated. I think this is really, really life-saving. We can really save a lot of lives if everyone understands this.
Okay, wow. I think that was a really good discussion. Dr. Adrian, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just a final word is we have to collaborate and then we vaccinate all the dogs in Sarawak. And of course, the tagline is no bite, no rabies. And let's work together towards zero rabies by 2025 in Sarawak. The world rabies target is zero rabies by 2030. But for Sarawak, we want to have zero rabies by 2025. Let's work together because we need to collaborate using a one health concept. Everybody working together, including the dog owner and the public as well.
Thank you, Dr. Adrian. And how about you, Datin, from the community point of view, what can we do?
As Dr. Adrian was saying, we all need to work together. It's one of the One Health approaches that we need to have. So vaccination, spay and neuter. And then there was the other one that Dr. Ho mentioned is prevention of dog bites. The saying, let sleeping dogs lie is there because if you see a dog that's asleep, don't disturb it. He might wake up, suddenly get shocked and bite. Don't disturb. If you see cute puppies, there might be a very protective mother around. So this is one of the main themes that we talk to school children, especially because rabies tends to affect children at a higher rate because they tend to mix around and tend to pick up animals without fear, you see. So whilst we don't want to instill fear, we just want to instill awareness on how to do dog bite prevention. And all of this can, of course, be found online for those who are interested to see. There's a very nice posters that you can share with children and teach them.
Oh, you forgot to share your poster earlier.
Yeah, that's right.
We'll post it up on our Facebook after this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we left that out. All right. So thank you to all speakers, Dr. Ho, Dr. Adrian, Datin, Dona. To all our viewers, thank you so much for joining us today. And what you learned today, please tell your family members, your friends, your neighbors, even your enemy. This is a horrible disease. You don't even want to wish it on your enemies, okay? So anyone.
There's no cure.
Yeah, there's no cure for this. So let's all be in this together to fight the virus, especially in Sarawak. We're all facing this right now together with COVID. And thank you to our partner, TV Sarawak, for being with us on this. And don't forget to donate to SSPCA so that you can realize their animal village dream.
Thank
all right.
you.
Until next time, stay safe, everyone, and have a great week ahead. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Stay safe.